I recently rewatched Longlegs, and since it's the spooky season and a lot more people are watching this movie now with it being out on streaming, I figured I'd make another video on this movie. My first video on Longlegs came after my initial viewing, but now that I've seen it again, and this time I had the help of subtitles to really know what each line was, that was a slight issue in my theater, I have a better grasp on the movie, and I have some new thoughts. Overall, I really like Longlegs, and if you have seen some of my videos before, then you know that I love originality in movies. Longlegs is definitely original. There is no arguing against that. There are very few movies that are similar to Longlegs, and when it comes to the stylization and visuals that this movie has to offer, it truly stands in a league of its own. And this is incredibly refreshing, especially in the modern era of film. I mean, if we're talking strictly about visuals, then Longlegs is the painting of Kronos eating his son. And I'm not going to show that on YouTube for obvious reasons, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. YouTube daddy, don't punish me for being a bad boy! Hopefully that weird-ass impression didn't get you to click off the video just yet, but this is a segue into my next point. We have to talk about the standout character that this movie is named after, Longlegs. I know some people give Nicolas Cage a hard time for his performance as Longlegs. I've seen a good amount of people claiming that he's overacting. Speaking for myself though, I actually really enjoyed his performance, and it grew on me more during my second watch. I get the singing bits are complete meme material, and I remember during my first watch in the theater, these girls behind me just couldn't stop laughing, and don't get me wrong, it is funny, especially when taken out of context, and there is a lot of meme potential with these scenes. But this eccentric devil worshipper is a unique character, and he will stay with us as one of the few memorable serial killers from modern cinema. There are so many serial killers from detective and horror movies that feel like copy and paste, and they are relatively forgettable, but Longlegs does not fit into this category. And this is extremely impressive since it's getting harder and harder to write memorable standout characters who are nothing like those that came before them. I also find Longlegs genuinely creepy and unsettling, and I love the makeup transformation they put on Nicolas Cage, and it's to the point where he resembles the very dolls he gives out, which is clearly a deliberate choice, but we will talk more about the substance of this movie later on in the video. I love the subtleties in his performance as well, and after going through some of Cage's interviews, he mentions that his acting takes heavy inspiration from his own mom, who had some mental problems, and this adds another terrifying layer to this performance. The other characters are decent, but none of them stand out nearly as much as Longlegs, and this is natural because they are much more normal in comparison to Longlegs. Maika Monroe's character, Lee Harker, feels heavily inspired by Clarice Starling from The Silence of the Lambs. Greatest movie ever, by the way. I always say that. It's my favorite movie of all time. Lee's mom, Ruth Harker, is also well written, and Alicia Witt does a great job of presenting the trauma that this woman has to endure for the sake of her daughter. The other characters and performances are good too, like Blair Underwood as Agent Carter, Kiernan Shipka as Carrie Ann Camera, I hope I pronounced that right, and Lauren Akela as the young Lee, and the rest of the cast does a great job too. Before we get to the plot, let's also give a shout out to the marketing. The best part about Longlegs is probably the fact that it got all of our asses in the seats. This was easily one of the best trailers I've seen in recent years. I love the music choices, the frames they chose, and while some parts were kinda corny, like the resting heart rate part, it still worked and most of us were hyped to see this movie. And we have to discuss the decision to not reveal Nicolas Cage's look as Longlegs, which was absolutely brilliant.
A brilliant move!
Fantastic stuff by the marketing department, and I love the original strategies they used for this movie. Yes, also the heartbeat thing, even if it seems kinda embellished. Longlegs as a movie is good, but I think the marketing might be even better, and this is a massive compliment to the advertising of this movie. I also love this opening scene, and on my rewatch, I noticed that the POV shot is from the doll's perspective. This opening scene sets the perfect tone for the rest of the movie, and the movie as a whole has so many little details that I absolutely love. And just to mention one, the numbers generator scene is filled with foreshadowing for the rest of the film. A cool little detail is that Lee associates the word father with the upside down triangle, which fits in with Longlegs' murder schedule, and this makes sense since the closest thing Lee has to a father is Longlegs, as we find out in the movie. There are just so many cool details that I could go on about. Wait, why does this look kinda familiar? Is Longlegs trying to tell us who the devil really is? Before we move on in the video, I'm going to give this movie some pushback, but don't think I hate this movie or that I think it's bad, because I really like Longlegs. I just don't agree with every choice on an artistic level, but the fact that there is so much discussion to be had around this movie speaks to how unique it is, and it's been an extremely long time since we've had a horror movie do this. So even though I'll be critical in some areas and I might seem incredibly nitpicky, just know that I love this movie. Back to the video. Now let's move on to the plot, which is where we will get much more divisive. Overall, I like the writing in Longlegs, and I'm going to praise it before I talk about some of my observations. I want to use a neutral term because not all of these are criticisms. There are a good amount of double entendres in this movie, which is nice and it makes it feel clever. The concept is quite original, and it's much different than the usual stuff we see. I also like the parallels we find in this movie, and the new dynamics it brings to the table. I love the links between the movie and Osgood Perkins' relationships with his own parents. And I love the idea of someone having to commit evil for the sake of their family. It really shows how much this mother is willing to sacrifice for her daughter, to the point where she is willing to forsake her faith, but it also has this idea of what we are willing to hide from our children for the sake of their well-being. I also like the parallel between Longlegs and the dolls, and how Longlegs is a living doll himself for Satan. We see this parallel hinted at with a cross dissolve in the movie, and it makes sense when you think about it. The same way the dolls become conduits for evil, Longlegs is himself a conduit for Satan. It's a cool and unique idea, and I never mind something original. Now let's get to some of my observations. Longlegs is a movie that is based on its own internal logic, and this all relates to the dolls. This also can make it difficult to distinguish between what's free will and what's influenced by the doll. For example, Lee Harker becoming a FBI agent, was that her own free will? Was it the doll's influence as part of Longlegs' scheme? Or was it just plot convenience? I think it's probably the doll's influence, since I believe it's Longlegs' master plan to have Lee kill her mom, since that is the epitome of evil, and this can only happen through her investigating the cases. Also, how does Lee get a call from the devil about going to Agent Carter's house after the doll is destroyed and she is freed? Or is she even free? The point I'm making here is that we don't have definitive answers for many of the things in the movie, since we're dealing with the supernatural and a made up but not very clear set of rules that the dolls enact on the victims. This is just a natural consequence of dealing with the supernatural, and you will definitely leave this movie with more questions than answers, especially on your first watch. For people who are fans of the typical detective movie that is realistic and based on the natural world, you may not like this aspect of Longlegs. I talked about this in my original video, and while I'm not the writer of Longlegs and this is all up to Osgood Perkins, I personally would have preferred it if Longlegs didn't bash the supernatural element over your head constantly, especially with the exposition dump that happens in the third act. I just prefer the more realistic serial killer movies, like Seven and Silence of the Lambs, and I think the majority of you as the audience do as well. And look, I'm not some neckbeard from the atheist subreddit who is totally against the supernatural. I'm a man of God, I believe in the supernatural, but I just prefer a more realistic and natural film that requires less gymnastics in the writing department. If you want to add a supernatural element, then I think alternate explanations should be possible and it shouldn't be so blatant. But look, I'm not critiquing the movie for this, I'm just saying my personal preference. An actual gripe I have with this movie is that it's not as deep as it could be. Longlegs is evil, but the reason why he's evil is never really explored. It's hinted at when he says during the interrogation that you have to get down to a work that gets dirty as it cleans. Badass line, by the way. And it seems like he's indicating that humans are meant to be evil, and therefore by embracing it, we are being authentic to ourselves. I just wish there was more made out of the reason why Longlegs chooses to be evil, and I think there's some really cool biblical potential here that the movie could have explored. You could talk about original sin and how mankind is meant to be evil in his very nature, and therefore, since God created us this way, we should be true to our natures and not blame ourselves for the imperfection that God gave us. This is me justifying the behavior of Longlegs on the spot, but I'm sure the movie could have thought of something deeper and something that relates to the religious and occult themes of the film. I'm just not a big fan of people being evil for the sake of being evil, and this area of the motive behind Longlegs feels like a missed opportunity from the film. They obviously don't need to spoon feed it to us. I know this movie wants its fair share of mystery, but at least give us some more hints to make out the motive. When you think about the best written serial killers and horror characters, they all have a purpose. Characters like Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, and John Doe all have a deeper meaning to their crimes. Characters without purpose always feel weaker, and this is my main issue with Longlegs, since he's doing all of this just because he worships Satan. And why does he choose to worship Satan? The movie never elaborates. Okay, so after doing some more research, I see that Longlegs is basically trying to invoke the coming of the Antichrist because he worships Satan, and the Antichrist is evil and whatnot. There are even some theories that Longlegs is the Antichrist himself, but just like with evolution, it's just a theory, bro. But the central question of why he worships Satan and why he believes in doing evil is still not answered. Now, diving into Christian eschatology, which is just the study of the end times, and drawing the parallels to Longlegs is really cool, and it's definitely intended by Perkins. But as a filmmaker, you also have to be conscious of the average viewer, and you have to give some leniency to them not picking up on every minute detail. The exposition dump in the third act is an example of Perkins not fully trusting the audience to piece together the plot themselves. And if the movie is already doing this, then I really don't think it would hurt to expand on why Longlegs is the way he is, and at least give us some more hints to get a gauge on how a human became this way. And look, I'm all for digging into the religious literature, and one of my biggest interests is theology, but I can only afford a movie so much ambiguity and vagueness. And when it comes to Longlegs' motive, I feel that it crosses the threshold for what is an acceptable amount. But this is personal preference, and even with the mysterious motive of Longlegs, I still find him to be incredibly fascinating and a unique character. I'm not entirely opposed to the exposition dump, by the way. It just stands out since the rest of the movie is so evasive and vague, and then you get 5 minutes of the movie just shooting straight down the pipe with information. I'm not against it since I do think the average audience member is going to be extremely confused since they won't bother to rewatch the movie and to pick up on the clues. And because it fits into the scene where Lee's mom is justifying what she's had to do. So even though this information dump contrasts with the rest of the flow of the movie, I still think it works, and I deem it acceptable. Also, I'm sorry if this video seems a bit all over the place. I'm making this video over the course of a week, and I have a lot of thoughts that are shifting as I look into Longlegs more and more. Some other problems I have are the introductions of certain clues and plot points. They can feel clumsy at times, and I don't like this forced jump scare with the doll on the Camera family farm, which is also a weird choice for a last name. If it has any significance, then please let me know in the comments below. So I'm editing this video, and now that I'm thinking about it, I guess the camera last name is to foreshadow that Lee will find Longlegs through the photograph she took of him with her camera as a child. That's my best guess as to why Oz Perkins chose this name. I've also seen some people complaining about the overt devil silhouette that is seen in some areas of the movie, and I can see the argument as to why this might cheapen the film to some people. I also think the ending could have been much stronger with a few tweaks. Where it sits, it feels a bit too ambiguous for its own good, and I think if they went further into the conflict of whether or not to destroy the doll, essentially to keep Ruby's knowledge pure, or destroy her innocence since she'll realize what her dad did, that would make for a much stronger ending. This would also add to the parallel of Lee wanting to hide the truth from Ruby, just like how her mother hid it from her. There's also other areas that could have been explored better, like the parallels between Lee, Ruby, and Carrie Ann camera, for example. I think the ending as is alluding to this idea of whether or not to destroy the doll, but I think if they played into it more, it could have been a lot stronger, and it seems that most people's issue with this movie is the ending as it currently stands. Now, you could counter the vast majority of things I'm saying by stating that Longlegs is intentionally flipping the detective genre on its head. The detective, Lee Harker, really is no detective at all, since she is just going on this predestined evil path that the devil has in store for her. The evil has no purpose, since evil just exists in the world. And while some of those points are fair, I still prefer the more traditional approach. Call me an old stickler, I guess, but don't get me wrong, I can still appreciate this movie, and I have a high amount of praise for it, even if I don't deem it to be perfect. And while I disagree with some choices in Longlegs, I still really enjoyed this movie, and I would say it's much better than some other reviews suggest. Besides these issues I discussed, I really liked Longlegs, and while I prefer its style over its substance, it's a breath of fresh air in modern cinema. There are so many movies nowadays that feel like a rehashed version of something that came before, but Longlegs is unlike anything else, and it's this originality that I admire so deeply. This movie is brave, with its bold writing choices, and while I may not support all of them, I can still appreciate the effort. This movie is gorgeous to look at, with its perfect dreary depiction of the Pacific Northwest, similar to The Ring, and I feel that Longlegs will have a solid fan base going forward. This is a movie that we will look back at and say that that movie was completely original and not afraid to do its own thing. And even if we didn't approve of everything, this movie still did a lot incredibly well. And it's for these reasons and the innovation of the genre that I will deem Longlegs a modern classic, especially in the horror genre where that bar isn't super high if I'm being brutally honest. Because like with other great modern horror movies, like Sinister for example, even if Longlegs isn't perfect, it still pushes the envelope and does some things extremely well. And as I said before, it's been a long time since a horror movie has had us discussing it so much, and this speaks to the ingenuity and novelty of Longlegs. There's also plenty of occult and religious symbolism to dig into, which other videos on YouTube have already done. And this level of detail, interwoven with the plot, is beautiful from a writing perspective. So there you have it, my extensive content farm of Longlegs. A great horror movie that you should watch again, because movies like this don't come too often. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.